Hello folks, welcome back. In this video, we are going to discuss how to handle frames. Okay, so handling frames, or also known as iframes, with Selenium involves switching the WebDriver's focus from the default content to the frame where you want to interact with web elements. Okay, to switch to a frame, you would have to use the switch to method. First, you need to identify and locate the frame element you want to switch to. You can locate a frame in 3 different ways, either by name or ID, by index, or by web element, and that's what we're going to discuss in this video. Okay, so let's go over to the practice site here. In the practice site that we've been using, if we scroll down, we actually do have a frame, okay, an iframe here. And inside this frame, we have the Chroma Tech Academy website. Now, how do we know this is a frame? Obviously, it says iframe here, but let's pretend it didn't say iframe here. Okay, so there are a few things. You can basically do to quickly identify if an element is within a frame. First, before I explain more of that, let's discuss why websites have frames or what could be inside a frame. So, depending on what platform you're supporting or application you're supporting, frames are actually very common, right? There could be some sort of information there, for example, like PDF documents, websites, other site information, and so on. Okay, now you most likely will have test cases where you have to interact with elements within a frame. Okay, however, you would think that you would just locate an element and just interact with it, for example, click on it or send keys or anything like that. But if you don't switch to a frame, you will encounter a no such element exception, because similar to Windows, we actually have to tell Selenium to switch to a frame if we want to interact with elements within that frame. Okay, so quick tips to basically determine if an element is within a frame. If I hover over here, okay, and if I right click anywhere here, you see that I'll see view frame source or reload frame. You can actually reload the contents of a frame. For example, this is the Chroma Tech Academy website within this frame. If I go ahead and click on reload frame, you guys are going to see the website refresh real quick. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click on it, and you saw it refreshed the website real quick, okay, inside the frame. Now, that's a quick way to know that these elements or that this website is within a frame. If I right click over here, you see we don't see those options anymore. Okay, so how can we switch to a frame here? Well, first let's inspect this frame, and I do want to kind of show you some limitations that Selectors Hub also has in case you guys are using Selectors Hub a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and let's say we want to inspect this element right here. Okay, now I already have the DevTools open with Selectors Hub open, and you see it gives me the iframe name. That's not the XPath to this button here. Okay, because I can see the HTML information here. We have the attributes, attribute values, and this XPath is not using any of these here. Okay, so how can we switch to this frame? And by the way, that is a limitation of Selectors Hub. Selectors Hub at the time of this video cannot really provide you with XPaths or CSS selectors or locators of elements that are within a frame. Okay, so first we have to switch to a frame, and you see, for example, this button here, we can see it highlights inside the frame. If we kind of scroll up the DOM here, and we keep scrolling up, eventually we stumble upon an iframe tag name, and this right here is the HTML information of this frame. Okay, so every frame on a web page starts with the iframe tag name. Okay, that's also important to know. And here we have different attributes and attribute values we can use to switch to a frame. Okay, again, first we need to switch to a frame, and then we can interact with elements. So let's go over to VS Code real quick. I went ahead and created a class called frames.java. Okay, and here I have code that we've been using in the previous videos that navigate to the practice site. Okay, but real quick on 24, 25, and 26, I'm using actions class, okay, to hover or to move to an element that is on the bottom of the page. Why? Because we want Selenium to be able to see the frame. In this example here, let me kind of scroll this down just real quick. Okay, in this example here, I'm moving down to this REST API link. Feel free to move to any element on the bottom of this page. The whole point, as we discussed in the previous video, is that Selenium interacts best with elements when they are visible. Okay, now if you want to run a test where you are interacting, or you want to interact with an element that is not really visible, you could have flaky results, meaning your test could pass or most likely fail. Okay, so in many occasions, we actually need to help Selenium out a lot by telling it what to do and so on. In this case, I'm hovering down, and then once I'm moving down, then I'm going to switch to the frame. Okay, so that's what I'm doing here on line 25, 26, and 27. Okay, now the first example here that I'm going to show you is how to switch to a frame using a web element. So I went ahead and located this frame, and I wrote an XPath. Okay, that's what I did. I wrote an XPath. I assigned this to variable frame of type web element, and on line 32, I'm switching to this frame. Okay, using this web element here. Okay, again, we can switch to a frame in 3 different ways: by web element, by index, or by name or ID. Now, after switching to the frame, what I want to do is I want Selenium to click on this button here, and I want to see these options here. Okay, so I actually wrote this code out on line 40. Let's go ahead and comment out 40 and 41. Okay, and what I've done here is I've inspected that button. Okay, using an XPath. I called the variable name frame menu button, okay, and assigned it to a type web element. And all I'm doing is I'm doing frame button dot click, okay. So I'm clicking on that button, okay. And then after, I want Selenium to basically, I'm sleeping the program for 2 seconds and then doing driver dot quit. I'm only sleeping the program so that we can see Selenium do these things for the sake of these videos. But again, you definitely don't want to use or sleep your programs if you don't have to. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this program. Let's see what happens. So Chrome browser opens. Okay, Selenium scrolls down. You saw that it switched to the frame. It clicked on that button, and then then Selenium did driver.quit. Okay, so it worked. We were able to switch to this frame using a web element. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and comment line 29 out real quick. We won't need it for the next example. Now in this example, line 35, we are going to show the example of switching to a frame by index. Okay, so frames are also index based, meaning the first frame starts at index 0, very similar to arrays. Okay, so you could have websites or scenarios where you may have to interact with frames within a frame, and you can go ahead and specify by index which frame you want to interact with. Okay, now here on this example, we only have one frame on the web page. So if we want to switch to that frame, we need to specify, we need to tell Selenium to switch to the frame at index 0, because that's the index of the first frame. Okay, in this example. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and after this, again, we want Selenium to interact with that button and then eventually do driver.quit. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this program. The browser opens. Okay, Selenium scrolls down. It switched to the frame, it clicked on that button, and there you go. Okay, when you switch to a frame by index, you don't need to inspect you don't need to inspect the element of the frame. So that's very helpful and very useful. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and let's see what happens when we specify an index of a frame that does not exist. For example, let's enter 1. Okay, and let's see what happens. Now, if we enter 1, that means I want Selenium to switch to the second frame of this page, but there is no second frame. We only have one frame. Let's go ahead and run this program and see what we get. Okay, so the browser opens, Selenium scrolls down, and then Selenium gets stuck here and the program stops. Okay, let's go ahead and close this, and let's see what type of exception we are encountering. So we are getting a no such frame exception, okay, because we're trying to switch to a frame that does not exist. You will also get this no such frame exception when you're using a web element as well, but the frame does not exist. You will get this exception, no such frame exception. Selenium tells us that there's no such frame. By the way, this is a stack trace message, and I want to remind most of you folks that in a stack trace message, most of the time, you get a lot of helpful information as to where your program is failing. For example, in most cases, the last line of a stack trace message points you to the exact location of where your code is failing. So here it's telling us that it's failing on line 35, and that's exactly where I'm prompted to. Okay, so we get a no such frame exception. Let's go ahead and change this back to 0. And let me go ahead and comment this out. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and save this. Okay, the next option is to switch to a frame using name or ID. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out. And where do we get this name or ID? Well, remember when we inspected this frame here, let me go ahead and bring this up here. Okay, let me go ahead and inspect this frame. Let's see. It was right here. Okay, so we have the, but by name or ID, that means to use the ID attribute value or the name attribute value. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch using the ID attribute value first. Let me come here and let me go ahead and just switch this real quick. Just like this, again, using the ID attribute value, and let's see if it works. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this. And the browser opens. Selenium scrolls down to the page. It switched to the frame. It clicked on the button, and that worked. Okay. So by ID is using the attribute value of the ID attribute. Okay. Now let's use the attribute value of the name attribute, which is this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm just going to go ahead and replace this here. Okay. Like this. Go ahead and paste this, and let's see if it works. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run this. Okay, the browser opens, Selenium scrolls down, clicks on the button, and there you go. That also worked as well. Okay, so to cover the last scenario, meaning another scenario that I want to show you is, okay, we've switched to the frame. We've interacted with an element in the frame, but now I want to exit the frame, okay? And I want to interact with an element on the main page. Okay, or also known as the default content. Okay, so again, just like we told Selenium that we wanted to switch to a frame, okay, we also have to tell Selenium to switch to the default content. In other words, exit the frame. Else I won't be able to interact with any of the elements in the main page or the default content. Okay, so the question is, how do we switch to the main page? Well, on line 44, we are going to use a method that's called switch to default content. Okay, this will return us or switch back to the main window. Okay, and here on line 45, what I'm doing is I want to click on that this REST API link that I've inspected over here. So this link right here. Okay, that's what I want to do. So again, I want Selenium to scroll down here, switch to this frame, click on this button, then switch out of the frame or switch to default content and interact with an element back on the main page. In this case, I'm interacting with this element here. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this program and let's see if it works. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and run it. Selenium opens. We scroll down, clicks on the button, it switched to default content and it clicked on that link and we are here. Okay, so it did work. Now let's see what happens if we don't switch to default content. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out. After interacting with the button inside the frame, I want to interact with an element outside of the frame. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's go ahead and run this program. The browser opens. Selenium scrolls down. It was able to switch to the frame, but then the last step failed, which is interacting with an element outside of the frame. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this and let's see what we get in the stack trace message. Okay, we're getting a stel element reference exception. Stel element reference element not found. Okay, stel element not found. So it was not able to interact with that element because we did not switch to default content. Okay, so just remember that this is important if you want to switch back to the main page. Okay, so let's go ahead and recap everything we've covered so far. Okay, now in this video, I'm using actions class to scroll down to an element on the bottom of the page. We discussed that this is one way to scroll down to an element. I haven't shown you how to do that with JavaScript executor interface, but that's in the videos to come. You can locate a frame you can switch to a frame in 3 different ways: by web element, by index, or by name or ID. Okay, so you can use either or. Now, remember that once you switch to a frame, you can go ahead and interact with any element you want within a frame. We also discussed that selector sub at the time of this video does not really help with providing you with locators of elements within a frame. Okay, and also remember lastly that if you want to exit the frame or switch back to the main page, or also known the default content, you have to use the switch to default content method. Okay, so anyway, go ahead and write this code out, and I'll see you guys in the next video.